Hi, I'm Gail Stewart. I'm 38 years old, and for the past 15 years, I've built my life around planning other people's weddings. It's funny, or maybe cruelly ironic, that after all this time spent turning dreams into reality for countless couples, my own dream wedding was just sabotaged. Not by chance, not by accident, but by my own sister. I'm an event planner by profession, but more than that, I'm the reliable one in my family. The quiet backbone who always shows up, who takes care of the messes others leave behind, and who pays the bills when things fall apart. I'm the person who runs the logistics nobody else wants to handle, the one who stays calm when things go sideways, and the one who forgives too easily. I never thought that being dependable would come with such a heavy price. For as long as I can remember, I've been the one everyone turns to. When my parents needed help with the household or financial support, I was there. When my sister Vanessa got herself into trouble, whether it was losing a job, skipping rent, or causing chaos at family gatherings, I quietly stepped in to cover for her. It was just what I did. I believed family meant unconditional support, even when I wasn't getting much in return. David, my fiancé, he's the one who keeps me grounded. He's not from our family, so he doesn't have all the complicated history and tensions that come with being a steward. David and I met years ago at an event I was coordinating, and we connected instantly. He admires my work ethic and my kindness, but he's also the first to see when I'm hurting or spreading myself too thin. He's always encouraged me to stand up for myself, especially when it comes to my family. But even with his support, the weight of my family's expectations and betrayals has been hard to shake. Our wedding was supposed to be a fresh start, a celebration of love and a new chapter. We picked the date thoughtfully. Halloween, a nod to our shared love of the season and its playful, mysterious vibe. The venue was perfect. A charming old mansion decked out with vintage candles, cobwebs, and all the spooky flair that set the tone for a magical night. Months of careful planning, hours spent coordinating vendors, dress fittings, seating charts, all culminating in what I believed would be the happiest day of my life. But all of that came crashing down last week. Just hours before the ceremony, Vanessa made a call that changed everything. She canceled the venue reservation. No warning, no discussion, just a cold, careless phone call that left me stunned. Her explanation? It's just a prank, Gail. Chill out. She thought it was funny to sabotage my wedding as some kind of joke, something that would amuse her and the rest of the family. I was left standing in an empty, silent mansion, looking at the flickering candles and empty chairs, with guests texting in confusion and frustration. David was furious, not just because the day was ruined, but because the family who should have been there for me was nowhere to be found. Vanessa laughed it off, thinking I'd forgive her like I always do. But this time, everything inside me shattered. It wasn't just a canceled wedding venue. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than any prank had before. It laid bare the fault lines of our family relationships, fault lines I hadn't fully acknowledged until that moment. I realized I'd been quietly carrying the weight of a family that didn't seem to appreciate or respect me. That day, standing alone at the venue, I felt countless emotions swirling inside me: anger, sadness, disbelief. The promises I made to myself, the hopes I had for my wedding, the years of effort and love poured into this moment, all wiped away in the cruelest way imaginable. Yet, even in that chaos, I held on to something fragile, the hope that maybe I could find a way through this, that family could still mean support, forgiveness, and love. But deep down, I wasn't sure anymore if that hope was realistic. That's where I am now, caught between the life I've built for others and the life I want for myself, between the sister I've been and the woman I need to become. And I'm ready to tell you everything that led me here. Vanessa has always been the favored child in our family, the bright, carefree star that everyone seems to orbit around. She's the one with the loud laugh, the bubbly personality, and that effortless charm that makes her the center of attention wherever she goes. Growing up, she was the fun one, the golden girl who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. Meanwhile, I was expected to quietly carry burdens, to be the responsible one who keeps everything running smoothly behind the scenes, even when it cost me dearly. From the very earliest memories I have, the pattern was clear. Family decisions, big and small, were made without my input. Whether it was planning holidays, choosing who to invite to gatherings, or even how to handle family crises, Vanessa's voice was always heard first, hers the opinions that mattered. I was often relegated to the sidelines, an afterthought, expected to go along with it without protest. I learned early on to keep my feelings to myself, because voicing them only resulted in being labeled too sensitive or jealous. I remember one particular Christmas when I was about 10 years old. My parents were deciding where to spend the holiday, and Vanessa had insisted we go to an amusement park, promising the best time ever. I had wanted to visit my grandmother's house, a quieter, more meaningful tradition for me, but when I tried to say so, my words were brushed off. "Gail, you always want to be the odd one out," Vanessa sneered, and my parents chuckled, making me feel like the problem was me, not their dismissiveness. That moment was a small wound, but it set the tone for years to come. Whenever I showed interest in things differently from Vanessa, or when I expressed discomfort about family dynamics, my feelings were minimized or outright ignored. My parents rarely intervened. If anything, they reinforced Vanessa's supremacy by siding with her or telling me to lighten up. I became accustomed to swallowing my disappointments and putting on a brave face. It was easier than fighting a losing battle. As we grew older, Vanessa's behavior escalated from mere favoritism to something more hurtful. Her pranks and jokes often targeted me personally, veiled as playful teasing, but cutting deeper than she realized. At family dinners, she would make offhand remarks about my choices, my career, or my personality. I recall one summer barbecue when she loudly joked that I was the family's unpaid maid, insinuating that all my support was just expected because I cared too much. The room filled with laughter, but none of it felt funny to me. Each time I tried to stand up for myself, I was met with resistance or dismissal. "It's just sibling rivalry," my mom would say, waving me off gently but firmly. My dad, more often than not, would shrug and say, "You need to toughen up, Gail." Their response was clear. Vanessa's antics were normal, and my reaction was the problem. This taught me that my feelings weren't valid, and that being the quiet burden bearer was my role in the family. Even outside of direct interactions, I was excluded. When Vanessa planned trips, she rarely bothered to tell me until it was a done deal. Family group chats would buzz with inside jokes and plans I wasn't invited to. It wasn't always blatant. Sometimes it was subtle, like chairs left unpulled for me at the dinner table, or my messages ignored in favor of Vanessa's witty banter. I became invisible in my own family's social fabric. Despite all this, I tried to rationalize their behavior. I told myself Vanessa was just more outgoing, that my parents' favoritism was cultural or generational, and that things would improve once I proved my worth in other ways. I held on to hope that one day, they would see me as more than just the responsible fallback, or the sister who had to endure the jokes. I wanted to believe that family meant unconditional love, not just for the popular or easy child, but for all of us. But the truth settled in slowly, like a cold shadow creeping across a bright room. The family dynamics were deeply broken. Vanessa's pranks weren't harmless jokes. They were ways to assert dominance and maintain the status quo. My parents' dismissals weren't just ignorance, they were complicity. I was expected to be the stable, silent backbone, never asking for recognition or respect. This harsh reality shaped who I became: methodical, cautious, and always prepared to handle crises quietly. Yet it also planted seeds of resentment that remained mostly buried until recent events forced them to the surface. The pattern was clear, and I could no longer pretend it was just normal family stuff. I started keeping a private journal, notes on every incident, every slight, every moment I was made to feel less than. It wasn't just about remembering the pain. It was about understanding it, documenting it, and preparing myself for what might come next. Each page was a reminder that my feelings were valid and that my endurance had limits. Vanessa's favored status was the lens through which my entire family viewed me, and it dictated how I was treated. The fun sister got the spotlight, the forgiveness, and the benefit of the doubt. I got the silence, the burdens, and the blame. It was a toxic imbalance that shaped not only our relationships, but also my sense of self. As I reflect now, I realize that this dynamic wasn't something I could fix by being more patient or more forgiving. It was a fundamental fracture that required acknowledgement and change, something I wasn't sure my family was willing or able to provide. But I knew I couldn't keep living in the shadow of Vanessa's fun at the expense of my own dignity. The stage was set for the events that would soon break open everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and respect. And while I still held on to hope for healing, I was beginning to understand that sometimes love alone isn't enough to keep a family together. Sometimes it takes standing up and drawing new boundaries, even if that means disrupting the fragile balance that has long kept us all trapped. I've sacrificed more for this family than I can easily put into words. Sacrifices so quietly made that most people, even those closest to me, never really noticed. When Vanessa lost her job last year, it wasn't just a temporary setback for her. It became an all-consuming crisis that rippled through our family. She spiraled quickly, unable or unwilling to find new work, and the rent on her apartment started piling up. Without a second thought, I stepped in. I covered her rent for 3 months straight, quietly transferring money into her account. No questions asked. I told myself it was just what sisters do, help each other in times of need. But even as I clicked send on those payments late at night, when I was exhausted from a full day of managing other people's weddings, a knot grew in my stomach. I wondered if she ever felt grateful, or if she just expected me to keep bailing her out, like an invisible safety net. That was only the beginning. On top of that, I took responsibility for driving Mom to her endless doctor appointments. She has chronic health issues, and those trips are draining, physically, emotionally, and financially. I rearranged my schedule countless times, canceling client meetings or pushing deadlines so I could be the chauffeur, the emotional support, and the advocate all at once. The car rides were often filled with Mom's anxious chatter about test results or medication side effects, and while I listened, I couldn't help but feel the weight of it all pressing down on me. I wanted to be there for her, but it often felt like I was losing pieces of myself in the process. Meanwhile, my own life goals quietly receded into the background. I postponed vacations I desperately needed, delayed buying a home with David, and shelved plans for personal projects that could have brought me joy beyond my work. I told myself these were temporary sacrifices, small prices to pay for keeping my family afloat. But the truth was more complicated. Each postponed dream chipped away at my sense of self, and the more I gave, the more invisible my needs became. Even financially, I stretched myself thin. There was the time I lent Vanessa money to help fund her small business, a boutique candle shop, which, ironically, was meant to symbolize warmth and light. I believed in her potential, thinking this gesture might finally build goodwill between us. But instead of gratitude, I was met with casual disregard. Payments were late or skipped altogether, excuses aplenty, and no real effort to repay me. Yet I kept quiet, carrying the burden of unpaid debts and broken promises like an unspoken truth. David watched all of this unfold. He saw the toll it took on me, the exhaustion, the frustration, the quiet sadness beneath my smiles. He tried gently pushing me to say no, to prioritize myself, but he also understood the tangled web of family loyalty that held me tight. "Gail, you're not a bank for everyone else's mistakes," he told me once, with a tenderness that both comforted and pained me. But breaking free wasn't easy when every fiber of my being had been trained to soothe, fix, and support. At family gatherings, I was often the one managing logistics, coordinating who sat where, calming tensions, smoothing over Vanessa's latest outburst or mishap. While Vanessa basked in the spotlight of charm and laughter, I worked behind the scenes, ensuring things didn't fall apart. Yet when moments arose for recognition or gratitude, I was met with silence or worse, subtle erasure. It was as if my labor was invisible, assumed, expected. Looking back, I see now that my sacrifice was a double-edged sword. On one side, it brought me a strange kind of pride, a belief that I was the glue holding everything together. On the other, it fed a dangerous pattern where my family took my goodwill for granted. I was the reliable one, the responsible sister, the caregiver who never asked for anything in return. And in that role, I lost sight of my own worth. I wish I could say that these sacrifices were met with understanding or love, but the truth was far harsher. The family dynamic treated my generosity like a given, something to exploit rather than cherish. Vanessa's careless pranks and dismissive attitudes grew bolder, fueled by the knowledge that I would always be the one to clean up the mess. My parents, wrapped in their own biases and loyalties, rarely acknowledged the strain I bore. It was as if my pain and effort were invisible threads woven into the background of their lives. Still, I held on to hope. Hope that the love I poured out would one day be recognized, that my loyalty would earn me respect, that my sacrifices would build bridges rather than walls. But with each passing day, those hopes dimmed under the weight of repeated betrayals and dismissals. Now, standing at this crossroads, feeling the sting of Vanessa's latest betrayal and the cold distance of my parents, I'm beginning to understand that sacrifice, without boundaries or respect, can become a kind of imprisonment, and I'm starting to ask myself, how much more can I give before there's nothing left of me? How long can I keep carrying a family that doesn't seem to carry me back? The answer is unfolding. But one thing is clear. I can no longer be the silent, invisible support system. Not if I want to reclaim my own life and dignity. Thanksgiving dinner last year was supposed to be a warm gathering, a chance to reconnect, laugh, and share gratitude. Instead, it became one of the most painful nights etched into my memory. The house was buzzing with relatives I hadn't seen in weeks, if not months, filling the rooms with chatter and the clinking of silverware. The rich aroma of roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and cinnamon-spiced pumpkin pie swirled around me, but none of it could mask the tightening knot in my stomach. I was sitting near the head of the table, quietly observing the conversations, trying to keep my nerves in check. David was beside me, offering a reassuring smile as he chatted with my uncle about his recent hiking trip. The rest of the family sipped wine and told stories, but I felt like a spectator rather than a participant. It wasn't unusual. I'd grown used to fading into the background during these events. That's when Vanessa decided to make her move. She didn't ease into it with a subtle jab or a sly comment. Instead, she launched her mockery like a spotlight aimed straight at me. Loud enough for everyone to hear, she said, "Gail is the boring planner who never lives her own dreams. She spends her life making everyone else's special days perfect, but when it comes to her, nada. Just spreadsheets and seating charts." A few heads turned. Smiles flickered uneasily, and the room fell into a brief, awkward silence. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, my throat tightening as embarrassment washed over me. Vanessa's words weren't just teasing. They were a deliberate strike, aimed to humiliate. I wanted to disappear into the chair, to vanish among the polished silverware and linen napkins. David's grip on my hand tightened. He shot Vanessa a protective look, his jaw clenched, but I raised a finger gently to stop him from saying anything. I wasn't ready to make a scene. Not yet. I forced a smile, trying to brush it off. But inside I was reeling. As if sensing my discomfort, Vanessa smirked wider and added, "Come on, Gail, lighten up. It's just a prank." Her tone was dismissive, almost gleeful, as if she believed her cruelty was some kind of joke everyone should laugh at. The phrase hit me like a slap. It's just a prank. The very words she'd used countless times to gaslight me into forgiving her. I met her gaze, trying to muster the courage to speak up. "It's not funny, Vanessa," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "I work hard. This is my career. It means something to me." The words felt small, swallowed by the din of the room. But Vanessa just rolled her eyes. "You're always so serious. Can't you ever take a joke?" she said, turning the spotlight away from herself and back onto me, as if I was the one who needed to lighten up. The family, my parents included, quickly shifted the conversation elsewhere, laughing nervously and changing topics to avoid the tension. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded along, but the sting of humiliation lingered far beyond that night. I replayed the moment in my mind over and over, the way Vanessa's laughter filled the air, the sideways glances from relatives who didn't know quite how to respond, and the way my parents' silence spoke volumes. It was clear that I was expected to absorb the insult and move on, to be the family's punching bag cloaked in patience. Later that evening, as the guests filtered out and the house grew quiet, I sat alone in the dimly lit living room. The remnants of the feast lay scattered on the table, but I felt hollow. I ran my fingers over the edge of the napkin where Vanessa's words had cut the deepest. Not just the joke itself, but the callous disregard for my feelings. That night, I realized something I'd been reluctant to admit for years. Vanessa's pranks weren't harmless fun. They were carefully aimed weapons, designed to undermine me, to remind me of my place in the family hierarchy. What hurt the most was knowing my parents were complicit, not by direct action, but by their refusal to stand up for me or even acknowledge the pain inflicted. Thanksgiving was supposed to be about thanks and togetherness. Instead, it became a vivid reminder of how invisible I was to the people I loved, the sister who planned everyone else's happiness but was never allowed to claim her own. The boring planner label was less about my job and more about how they saw me, dull, unworthy, and easily dismissed. That night planted a seed of quiet despair, tangled with a simmering resolve. I promised myself that I wouldn't keep letting these moments define me, that my worth wasn't tied to their approval or their jokes. But even as I made that vow, I knew that the road ahead would be anything but easy. Vanessa's laughter echoed in my ears long after the candles were blown out, and the family's silence was deafening. Still, the night was far from over, and the real tests of loyalty and strength were waiting just around the corner. Last Halloween was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Months of planning, endless phone calls, late nights coordinating every detail down to the tiniest cobweb. And here I was, just hours before my wedding, standing in a cavernous, eerily silent mansion that was supposed to be buzzing with guests. Instead, it was empty. The only movement came from flickering candles casting long shadows on the walls, mocking the celebration that was never going to happen. I remember the exact moment the call came through. My heart was pounding as I rushed to the venue, excitement turning to confusion when the front door was locked. The event coordinator, who I'd trusted with the final arrangements, was frantically explaining over the phone that the booking had been canceled by someone claiming to be me, or rather, by someone authorized but without my knowledge. My voice cracked as I tried to make sense of it. "Vanessa? Why would you do this?" Her voice on the other end was light, almost gleeful. "It's just a prank, Gail. You have to admit it's funny." "Funny? Funny to ruin what was supposed to be the most important day of my life? To strand me in front of guests who were already arriving, confused and frustrated? To break David's heart and mine?" My cheeks burned with humiliation as I looked down at my dress, the intricate lace and delicate beads now feeling like a costume in a cruel play. I could hear the buzz of incoming texts and calls, guests unsure if the wedding was still happening, some pleading for answers. David was beside me, his face pale and tight with anger, his hands clenched into fists. "This isn't just a joke, Gail. It's sabotage." I wanted to scream, to cry, to lash out at Vanessa, but all I could do was stand there, frozen, heart-shattering with each passing minute. The wedding I'd dreamed of, the celebration David and I had envisioned, dissolved in front of me like a bad nightmare. When I finally confronted my parents, hoping for support or at least understanding, the coldness I met was like a slap. Mom and Dad brushed off my pain, accusing me of being too sensitive and overreacting. "Vanessa meant no harm," Mom said softly, avoiding my eyes. "It's just her sense of humor." Dad chimed in with a dismissive, "You always take things too seriously, Gail. You need to lighten up." It felt like the family I'd held onto, the people I trusted, were turning their backs on me in my moment of need. Vanessa laughed it off, her smirk taunting me, certain I'd forgive her like I always did, that I'd let it slide because that's what family does. But standing there, surrounded by empty chairs and flickering candles, I realized something else. This wasn't a prank. It was a betrayal. A public humiliation crafted by the one person I should have been able to count on. And the silence from my family, their refusal to acknowledge the damage done, cut deeper than any joke ever could. David held me close, whispering that we would get through this together, that I wasn't alone. But the ache inside me was not just for the ruined wedding day. It was for every moment I'd been overlooked, dismissed, and taken for granted. For every sacrifice I'd made that no one had noticed. For the quiet hope that family meant loyalty and love, even when it didn't feel like it. That night, as I sat alone in the darkened mansion, the weight of years of hurt pressed down on me. The shattered dream of my Halloween wedding was a symbol of something bigger, of a family fractured by favoritism, cruelty, and denial. I knew that this moment marked a turning point. The question was, what would I do next? Would I let this break me, or would I find a way to rebuild, on my terms, and with the strength I'd been too afraid to claim before? After the chaos of that cursed Halloween night, the days that followed were a blur of restless nights and racing thoughts. Sleep became a stranger to me. I'd lie awake, replaying the scene over and over. The empty mansion, the flickering candles, the confusion and disappointment in my guests' messages, David's clenched fists, and Vanessa's mocking voice on the phone. Each replay dug deeper into my heart, scraping raw a pain I hadn't fully allowed myself to feel until then. At first, it was grief, a crushing, suffocating sorrow for the dream that was stolen from me, for the future moment David and I had envisioned together that was now lost. But as the hours stretched into days, that grief hardened into something colder, sharper. It morphed into a simmering fury, a fire of anger that no amount of tears could extinguish. I found myself sitting alone at the kitchen table late one night, the house quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. My planner notebook lay open in front of me, its pages filled with meticulous notes from years of family gatherings. Every slight, every favor, every moment I had been the invisible glue holding our fractured family together. I flipped through the pages again, this time not to document but to confront. Each entry told a story of sacrifice. The nights I skipped my own rest to cover Vanessa's rent. The hours I spent driving my mother to endless doctor's appointments. The countless times I swallowed my own pain so I could be the calm in the storm. And woven throughout those entries were the humiliations. The public jabs Vanessa made under the guise of jokes. The dismissive glances from my parents when I tried to speak up. The cold silences when I needed support. The truth struck me with an undeniable clarity. They all took me for granted. Not just Vanessa, but Mom and Dad too. Their dismissive words, their refusal to stand up for me, their blind favoritism. It wasn't ignorance or love misguided. It was a pattern of entrenched selfishness. Vanessa's pranks weren't mere acts of childish mischief. They were deliberate weapons, aimed to undermine me and reinforce her place at the center of our family's orbit. My parents' silence, their quickness to accuse me of being too sensitive or jealous, was their way of protecting that fragile hierarchy. And me? I had been quietly complicit, forgiving too easily, hoping that my loyalty and sacrifices would somehow earn me respect or affection. But now I saw it for what it was, a one-sided ledger, where my deposits were never valued, and my withdrawals met with scorn. A wave of cold fury swept over me as I realized something else, something more unsettling. They didn't just take me for granted, they relied on me. They depended on my goodwill, my financial support, my emotional labor, and my patience. They assumed I would always be there to bail them out, to smooth things over, to carry their burdens so they could continue their lives undisturbed. And when I finally had the courage to ask for respect or fairness, they laughed it off as oversensitivity or, worse, dismissed me outright. The very people who should have been my strongest allies became my greatest sources of pain. That night, as the anger settled into a cold, determined resolve, I made a decision. I realized I owed them nothing, not forgiveness that allowed this behavior to continue, not my money, not my time, and certainly not my unquestioning loyalty. For years I had been the family's safety net, absorbing every shock and patching every tear in the fabric that was unraveling. But the fabric was frayed beyond repair, and I was tired of being the invisible thread. I wanted, and needed, to reclaim my own worth, my own boundaries, my own life. I thought about David, his steady presence amidst the storm, and how hard he'd tried to help me see my value beyond the family's expectations. His belief in me gave me strength, but this fight was mine to own. I was done bending, done apologizing for wanting to be respected. I was done letting others define my worth based on their whims and biases. As dawn crept through the kitchen window, I closed my planner notebook and felt a strange calm come over me. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. Breaking patterns that had been ingrained for decades would require courage and strategy. But for the first time in a long while, I felt ready, not just to survive, but to take back control, to make sure that the next chapter wasn't about being the family's overlooked caretaker, but about being the woman who demanded respect, set firm boundaries, and stood tall in her own right. The silence of the early morning was a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me, but within that quiet, I found my voice waiting to be heard. I knew the next steps would shake the very foundation of what my family thought they could take for granted. And as that resolve settled, so did a quiet certainty. I was no longer willing to be invisible. Not anymore. The first step was to take stock, to really see, without the usual blur of forgiveness and excuses, how deeply my family depended on me, and how much I had given without even realizing the full extent. Vanessa wasn't just the golden child who got away with everything. She was a woman who leaned heavily on my generosity, my stability, and my professional connections to keep her fragile life afloat. And my parents? They weren't innocent bystanders either. They had grown accustomed to my presence as the financial and emotional safety net, expecting me to clean up their messes without question or complaint. I sat down at my kitchen table, the soft glow of my laptop illuminating stacks of old bank statements, text messages and emails I'd quietly saved over the years, every transfer to Vanessa's accounts, every payment for her rent, every unpaid invoice for her business investments. I compiled them all, line by line, tracing a trail of silent sacrifice that no one had ever acknowledged. It was painful to see the numbers laid bare, but it was also empowering. For the first time, I was not just a giver, I was a recorder, a witness to my own endurance. Beyond the financials, I meticulously reviewed the countless hours I'd spent caregiving for my mother, driving her to doctor appointments, waiting in sterile clinics, navigating insurance calls and medication refills. It was a job I took on quietly, but one that drained me physically and emotionally. I pulled up my calendar from the past year and highlighted each appointment I'd rearranged my schedule for. The evenings lost, the work I'd missed or rescheduled. Those sacrifices hadn't been invisible. They had been expected. Then there was the work I'd done for the family behind the scenes, planning events, coordinating gatherings, smoothing over crises caused by Vanessa's recklessness. I opened my event planning files and emails where I'd arranged everything from birthdays to holiday dinners, often on short notice or with minimal thanks. I found message threads where Vanessa had casually texted me to handle the guest list or make sure Mom's bills get paid this month, assuming I would do it all without question. And yet, while I was busy being the family's invisible pillar, I had documentation of every slight, every joke at my expense. Every moment my feelings had been dismissed or invalidated. I scrolled through months of family group texts where Vanessa's pranks were not only tolerated, but celebrated. "It's just a prank, Gail. Don't be so sensitive," she'd text after sabotaging some aspect of my life, followed by laughing emojis and her parents' quick appraisals that I was overreacting. The pattern was relentless, and the weight of it pressed down on me like a physical force. I gathered all this evidence quietly, carefully, without a word to anyone. It was a stark contrast to the chaos they'd caused in canceling my wedding with a single phone call, leaving me stranded and humiliated. This time, I wasn't reacting in desperation or pain. I was preparing. I consulted with a lawyer I trusted, discussing how I could protect myself and my assets from further exploitation. We talked about updating my will, about revising financial arrangements, and putting legal safeguards in place to prevent unauthorized access to my accounts. It was intimidating and, in some ways, heartbreaking, because it meant officially acknowledging that my family could not be trusted. I set up new bank accounts in my name only, changed passwords on shared services and credit cards, and withdrew permissions I had long granted out of goodwill. I reassigned power of attorney for my mother's healthcare decisions to a neutral party, no longer willing to carry that alone or be manipulated through it. Through it all, I maintained a calm exterior, never revealing the storm of determination brewing beneath. To anyone watching, I was just busy with work, maybe a little stressed, but nothing unusual. Vanessa and my parents noticed nothing at first. They continued their usual antics, sending texts that I no longer answered, making plans that I quietly declined without explanation. They expected me to drop everything, to continue absorbing their crises, to forgive and forget as always. But I was no longer that person. I was methodical, strategic, and resolute. The quiet gathering of evidence, the legal consultations, the financial reorganizations, all of it was my foundation for what was coming next. I wasn't interested in reckless retaliation or drama. I was constructing a proportional, calculated response that would make clear the era of taking me for granted was over. I would no longer be the invisible safety net, the unpaid planner, or the forgiving martyr. As I closed my laptop that night, the weight on my chest felt different, not heavier, but lighter, as if finally naming the truth gave me power. The road ahead was uncertain and likely painful, but for the first time in a long time, I felt in control. I wasn't just the victim of their cruelty anymore. I was the architect of boundaries they could no longer ignore. And with that realization came a quiet, fierce hope that respect, once denied, could be demanded, that family ties, once twisted by favoritism and neglect, could be rebalanced. But that hope still had to be tested in the days ahead, as I prepared to step into a new role, not just as the dependable sister, but as a woman standing firm in her own worth. After laying the groundwork in silence and secrecy, I began pulling back, but I did it subtly, too subtly for them to immediately notice. I didn't want an all-out confrontation yet. I knew from years of experience that abrupt changes would only provoke backlash or damage relationships beyond repair before I was ready. So instead, I started with the little things that had always gone unquestioned, the small but vital ways I kept the family machine running. The first sign of this shift was a delayed financial transfer. Vanessa usually knew by the end of each month that her rent money was on its way. But one evening, I let the transfer sit pending for a few extra days. I wasn't neglecting it out of spite. I was testing my own boundaries, seeing how it felt to say, "Not right now." When Vanessa messaged me, annoyed but still casual, "Hey, Gail, rent money? You forgot again?" I replied with a calm, "I'll get to it soon." No excuses, no apologies. That small hesitation was my first crack in the dam. It felt strange, almost transgressive. For so long, I'd been the invisible ATM, the unfailing source of support, and now I was withdrawing from that role, even if just a little. I didn't answer every text immediately. I let phone calls go to voicemail, especially those from Vanessa complaining about work drama or asking me to handle some family-related favor. When she called about preparing a family gathering, something I usually coordinated flawlessly, I gently declined. "I'm swamped with work this week. Maybe next time," I said, not offering room for negotiation. The family texts began filling with her complaints, a mixture of passive-aggressive jabs and outright grumbles. "Seriously, Gail? The planner can't plan one thing for us?" Vanessa wrote one afternoon, with a string of laughing emojis that felt less like humor and more like a challenge. I ignored it. I didn't reply to her texts that day or the next. My parents noticed the change too, though they brushed it off. When my mom called one evening, her voice trembling with worry about mounting bills and medical expenses, I listened patiently. But instead of my usual immediate assurance and financial help, I offered only advice and encouraged her to explore other options. "Mom, I wish I could do more, but I'm stretched thin right now. Maybe we can look into some assistance programs together." The silence that followed was heavy, like a question hanging in the air. Why isn't Gail stepping in like before? I also started declining the caregiving calls that had become routine. When Mom asked me to drive her to yet another doctor's appointment, I hesitated and then explained that I had deadlines I couldn't move. I wasn't cruel, just firm. I helped her find a rideshare service for the visit, arranging it quietly but deliberately. The shift was small but meaningful. For years, I had sacrificed my time and energy without complaint, and now I was reserving that energy for myself. Vanessa's texts and calls became increasingly frequent, and desperate. She accused me of being selfish, forgetting family, and acting like I don't matter. I read them carefully, but I kept my replies minimal and unemotional. I refused to engage in her attempts to guilt trip or provoke me. It was exhausting to see her unravel, but I couldn't let myself be pulled back into old patterns. My parents, too, started reaching out more, their voices tinged with confusion and subtle reproach. "Gail, are you okay? You've been so distant lately," Mom said during one call. "We miss having your help," Dad added in a separate conversation, his tone gentle but unmistakably disappointed. I held my ground, offering warmth, but no promises. "I'm doing what I need to do right now," I told them, careful to keep the message steady. Throughout all this, I maintained a calm exterior in family gatherings and public interactions. I smiled, I nodded, I played the part they expected, but inside I was making calculations, reinforcing boundaries I'd long avoided. The silence around my withdrawal was almost deafening. None of them seemed to realize that the dependable sister, the one who had always been the glue, was quietly stepping back. It was a strange and unfamiliar feeling, this deliberate withholding. For so long, I'd been the constant giver, the fixer, the one who held the family's fragile balance. Now, by pulling back, I was shifting the power dynamic, even if just a little. The family's dismissiveness had cost me enough. The time had come to quietly reclaim my own space, my own sense of worth. I knew this was only the beginning. The subtle withdrawal was the first tactical move in a larger plan, one that required patience and restraint. But already, I could feel the tension rising beneath the surface, the family's grip loosening as I drew my lines in the sand. The next steps would test their reaction and my resolve. For now, I was preparing the ground, setting the stage for a reckoning they wouldn't see coming. And as the quiet no's and delayed responses accumulated, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. It was a fragile control, but it was mine, and I wasn't giving it up. On the anniversary of that devastating Halloween, the day Vanessa canceled my wedding venue as a so-called prank, I made my move. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a public declaration. No shouting matches or angry texts. Instead, I approached it with the same precision and quiet strength I'd applied to every step of my transformation. This was about setting clear, firm boundaries and taking back control of my life and resources. That morning, I logged into my online banking. The screen glowed softly in my dim apartment as I navigated to the accounts where my family had long been authorized beneficiaries, accounts and credit cards I'd shared out of a misplaced sense of obligation and hope. I carefully removed Vanessa and my parents from all beneficiary lists. It was a small action, almost bureaucratic, but it felt monumental. Every click was a symbolic severing of the invisible financial ties that had bound me to their demands and dramas for far too long. Then came the notifications, automated emails confirming the changes. No explanations, no apologies, just cold facts. I felt a steady calm wash over me as I read each confirmation. This was my message to them. I was no longer their safety net. I also officially ended all financial support. The monthly transfers that had quietly kept Vanessa's apartment paid, the emergency funds I'd sent to cover my parents' unexpected bills, everything stopped. I drafted a succinct, unemotional message to send later that day outlining the new boundaries. It was clear and professional, void of blame or pleading, only stating facts and conditions for any future assistance. The message read something like this: "Effective immediately, I am suspending all financial support and services I have provided to Vanessa and Mom and Dad. Moving forward, any assistance will require clear communication, respect, and accountability. I am committed to maintaining relationships built on mutual respect and fairness. I hope we can work toward that." I hesitated before hitting send, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, knowing this would shake the fragile balance of our family dynamic. But I also knew it was necessary. For years, I had given without boundaries, hoping love and loyalty alone would protect me from being hurt. It was time to be pragmatic. Vanessa's reaction was immediate. Within minutes, my phone buzzed relentlessly with texts and calls from her, alternating between disbelief and anger. "Seriously, Gail? You're cutting us off? After everything?" Her voice cracked with a mix of frustration and a faint, desperate plead for mercy. I read the messages silently, allowing no response, letting the silence speak for me. My parents were slower to respond, but no less unsettled. The text I sent to Mom and Dad was met with a cold, clipped reply from Dad, accusing me of being harsh and breaking family apart. Mom's message was more cautious, tinged with sadness and confusion. "We don't understand why you're doing this now." I didn't engage. Instead, I maintained my calm tone in a brief reply. "This is what I need to do for my well-being. I hope you can respect that." Removing them as beneficiaries meant that they could no longer draw on my accounts or access shared credit lines, a control I hadn't dared to exercise before. For the first time, I felt a protective barrier around my finances, a buffer against the expectation that I would always be there to bail them out or fund their emergencies. I also withdrew my offers of professional favors, including event planning assistance. Vanessa had long relied on my contacts and expertise to promote and organize events for her small business and social appearances. I sent a carefully worded note to her, stating that from now on, any business help would be handled strictly as a paid service and only with advance agreement. It was a boundary that sent another clear signal. I was no longer her unpaid resource. Throughout the day, a strange mix of emotions welled up inside me: relief, fear, guilt, and a growing sense of empowerment. It was like stepping out of a shadow that had long obscured my own value. The silence from them after my decisions was deafening in its own way. No immediate apologies, no attempts at reconciliation beyond superficial texts, just a stunned quiet that hung heavy in the air. David was my anchor through all of this. When I shared what I'd done, he nodded with quiet pride. "You're doing the right thing, Gail. It's about time," he said softly, wrapping me in a hug that felt like a shield against the storm to come. That evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, the anniversary of my canceled wedding still looming, I looked at the flickering candle I'd lit earlier, a small symbolic gesture to honor what I'd lost and what I was reclaiming. I realized that by ending financial support and redefining my boundaries, I wasn't closing the door on my family. I was opening one on a new kind of relationship, one where respect and accountability were non-negotiable. But I also knew this was only the beginning. The silence that followed my message was fragile and temporary. The next days and weeks would test their reaction, and, more importantly, mine. Would they try to break me down with guilt and anger? Would they seek to manipulate me back into old roles? Or would they surprise me with acceptance? I wasn't sure. What I did know was that I was no longer willing to be a victim of their disregard. For the first time, I was holding the power to shape the future, not just for myself, but for how I allowed them to be part of my life. And as the night deepened, the quiet resolve inside me grew louder. The era of silent sacrifice was over. It was time for a new chapter, one written on my terms. Vanessa's world began to unravel almost immediately after I pulled back my support. It was subtle at first, before snowballing into a full-blown crisis that none of them had anticipated. I started noticing the signs in the messages I received from family members and the few interactions Vanessa allowed herself to have with me. Missed rent payments were the first glaring symptom. Vanessa, who had always relied on me to cover those bills without question, suddenly found herself scrambling. Rent reminders went unanswered, and the quiet panic in her texts was unmistakable, veiled, but there, beneath the usual bravado. Her small business, the boutique candle shop she'd launched with so much fanfare but little financial discipline, quickly showed cracks. Without my occasional financial injections and my professional network to lean on, her orders dried up. Vendors she'd depended on stopped extending credit. Customers began to drift away, confused by delayed shipments and inconsistent communication. The gleaming image she projected was fading fast, replaced by the harsh reality of a business struggling to stay afloat. Meanwhile, my parents' situation grew more precarious. Without my usual help to cover medical copays, household bills, and the occasional unexpected expenses, their mounting financial stress became impossible to hide. I could hear it in the tense tones of their phone calls, the way their voices wavered between frustration and pleading. Their usual requests for bailouts turned into desperate appeals, often at inconvenient hours, punctuated with thinly veiled guilt trips. "We never asked for this," Mom would say softly, while Dad's voice was tinged with disappointment, accusing me of abandoning the family when they needed me most. Despite these strains, I remained firm. Every call, every message was met with calm, measured responses that made it clear the era of unconditional support had ended. I didn't engage with anger or excuses. I simply reiterated the boundaries I'd set. "I'm sorry you're struggling," I would say, "but I can't continue to shoulder these burdens without respect or accountability." It wasn't cruelty, it was protection. I was protecting myself from years of exploitation and emotional depletion. Vanessa's reaction was particularly striking. One evening, she showed up at my door unannounced, draped in a nervous smile that barely masked her desperation. Her eyes darted around my apartment as if searching for signs of pity or an easy way back into the role of the favored sister. "Gail," she began, voice light but edged with anxiety, "I know things got out of hand. It was just a prank. Can't we move past this?" She laughed nervously, as if humor could dissolve the seriousness of what she'd done. But I didn't laugh. I didn't soften. I stood my ground, looking directly at her, my voice steady and resolute. "Vanessa, this isn't about a joke anymore. It's about respect, and you never showed me any." I didn't invite her inside. I didn't offer a shoulder to cry on. Instead, I gently but firmly closed the door, leaving her standing in the hallway, caught between disbelief and frustration. The family's escalation was immediate. Calls and texts flooded my phone, some teetering on accusations of betrayal, others dripping with guilt and veiled threats. Vanessa alternated between anger and feigned sorrow, while my parents vacillated between confusion and vehemence. Yet no matter how loud their voices or how persistent their pleas, I remained a fortress of calm. I refused to be drawn into their drama, to be manipulated back into old patterns. What was almost surreal was the response of the extended family. Slowly, whispers began among relatives who had long viewed Vanessa as the golden child, and me as the quiet, dependable sister. They started to question the narrative Vanessa spun about me, the one where I was supposedly the overbearing, difficult sibling. A few family members reached out privately, expressing subtle sympathy, surprised by the sudden shift and curious about what had truly happened. It felt like the foundation of their family's carefully constructed dynamics was cracking. Yet, Vanessa doubled down, her charm replaced by defensiveness and blame. She painted herself as the victim of a cold, ungrateful sister who cut her off for no reason. I watched from afar as the family saga unfolded, knowing that none of their attempts to sway me or pit relatives against me would succeed. I had documented everything, kept every message, every missed payment, every slight. I was prepared, not just with facts, but with the firm knowledge that my boundaries were necessary. Even as the Stewarts' reputation began to waver, foreclosure notices showing up in the mail, social events canceled due to financial strain, family tensions mounting, I held steady. I witnessed Mom's health decline under the growing stress, and it pained me deeply, but I knew that enabling behavior would only prolong the cycle. For the first time, the consequences of years of taking me for granted were fully visible. Their escalating problems were not my fault, but they were the natural fallout of a family system that had long relied too heavily on one person's silent endurance. Now that I had stepped back, the fragile house of cards was falling, and while it was difficult to watch, I understood that sometimes breaking down is necessary before rebuilding can begin. The days grew heavier, with unanswered questions and strained silences. Vanessa's business faced cancellations. My parents faced mounting debt. The flood of guilt, anger, and pleas from them all was met with my unwavering resolve. I no longer allowed myself to be pulled into the whirlpool of their demands. Instead, I guarded my peace, holding firm to the boundaries I'd set. This was the moment when the power dynamic shifted. No longer was I the invisible caretaker quietly absorbing their failures. Now, I was the architect of my own life's course, demanding respect in exchange for my presence. The family might resist, might plead or threaten, but I was done being the safety net for their recklessness. Their panic was palpable, but my silence spoke louder than any argument. Vanessa's laughter and dismissiveness were replaced by the stunned quiet of uncertainty. For the first time, she and the rest of my family had to face the reality that I was not theirs to take for granted. The balance was shifting, and I was ready for whatever came next. The fallout from my decisive withdrawal rippled through the Stewart family like a sudden storm breaking a fragile dam. Vanessa's carefully maintained world began to unravel at a pace that was both shocking and, in some ways, inevitable. It started with the first glaring cracks, the late rent payments. For years, I had been the unseen safety net. Rent checks, utility bills, emergency funds, all quietly covered without a single complaint or demand for thanks. But now, the silence in my bank account sent Vanessa into a tailspin. Texts and calls from her grew desperate, laced with frustration and thinly veiled panic. The bravado she relied on was faltering, replaced by an anxious desperation that was both unfamiliar and uncomfortable to witness. Her boutique candle shop, once a symbol of her entrepreneurial dreams and the warmth she promised to bring to others' lives, faltered under the weight of financial neglect and lost connections. Without the occasional infusions of money I had provided, and without the professional contacts I had pulled together to help promote her business, orders dwindled. Vendors stopped extending credit, customers grew wary of delayed shipments, and the shiny facade Vanessa loved to show off began to chip away. I heard from mutual acquaintances that her social media posts now carried a tone of quiet frustration, the once bubbly captions replaced by vague excuses and apologies for delayed shipments. Meanwhile, my parents faced their own mounting crisis. The careful financial balancing act I had maintained, covering unexpected medical bills, household expenses, and other emergencies, collapsed. I could hear the strain in their voices during phone calls, their usual calm replaced by a mixture of worry and thinly disguised resentment. Mom's soft voice often flickered with exhaustion as she pleaded, "Gail, we never wanted to put this burden on you." But her words rang hollow, undercut by the years of dependence on my support. Dad was more direct, his tone edged with disappointment and frustration, accusing me of abandoning the family when they needed me most. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said once, his voice tight. "Family comes first, Gail. Don't forget that." Despite the tidal wave of emotional blackmail and guilt trips, I remained unmoved. Each call, each message, was met with calm and measured responses, reinforcing the boundaries I had set. I was no longer the all-encompassing safety net. "I'm sorry you're struggling," I said firmly, "but I can't continue to bear these burdens alone. Without respect and accountability, I can't help." It was not cruelty or spite. It was self-preservation, a necessary shield forged from years of silent sacrifice. One evening, Vanessa's desperation reached a new peak. She appeared at my door unannounced, her usual confident smile replaced by a jittery, nervous expression. Her eyes darted around my apartment, scanning for signs of softness or an easy path back to the role I had long filled. "Gail," she began, her voice a mixture of anxiety and forced lightness, "I know things got out of hand. It was just a prank. Can't we move past this? Please." Her laugh was uneasy, a fragile attempt to mask the weight of her guilt. I looked her straight in the eye, steady and unyielding. "Vanessa, this isn't a joke anymore. It's about respect, and you never showed me any." I didn't invite her in, didn't offer comfort or apologies. Instead, I closed the door gently but firmly, leaving her standing in the dim hallway, caught between disbelief and frustration. The role of the forgiving sister was over. The family's reaction intensified rapidly. Calls and texts flooded in like a deluge, some laced with accusations of betrayal, others dripping with pleas for mercy or subtle threats. Vanessa oscillated between anger and sorrow, painting herself as the victim of a cold, ungrateful sister. My parents vacillated between confusion and vehemence, bewildered by the sudden withdrawal of their reliable support. Yet I stood firm, refusing to be drawn into the cycle of manipulation or guilt. What surprised me most was the shifting undercurrents among extended family. The narrative that Vanessa had long spun, that I was the difficult, overbearing sibling, began to crack under scrutiny. Relatives who had once accepted Vanessa's version of events now reached out privately, expressing sympathy and quietly questioning the story they'd been told. The carefully constructed image of the golden child was fracturing, revealing the messy reality beneath. Vanessa, however, dug in her heels. Her charm gave way to defensiveness and blame. She portrayed herself as the victim of my cruel cutoff, unwilling to acknowledge the years of dismissiveness and exploitation that led to this moment. I watched the family drama unfold with a mix of detachment and quiet satisfaction, knowing that my meticulous documentation of every slight, every unpaid debt, every unfair expectation was my armor. As the weeks passed, the consequences became undeniable. Foreclosure notices began arriving in my parents' mail, social events were canceled due to financial strain, and tensions simmered at every family gathering. Vanessa's business, lacking my contacts and financial cushion, floundered further. Mom's health visibly declined under the growing stress, a heartbreaking development that underscored the cost of years of unbalanced reliance. But I knew enabling them would only perpetuate the cycle of pain. The breakdown wasn't a punishment I inflicted. It was the natural consequence of a family system built on silent exploitation and unquestioned dependence. Now that I had stepped back, the house of cards was falling, and while watching this collapse was difficult, it was a necessary clearing before any rebuilding could begin. The days grew heavier with strained silences and unspoken questions. Vanessa's canceled orders, mounting debts, and the family's desperate, fractured messages converged into a chorus demanding attention and concession. But I did not relent. I guarded my peace fiercely, holding firm to the boundaries I had painstakingly drawn. This was the moment the balance of power shifted. No longer was I the invisible caretaker absorbing failures and smoothing over chaos. Now, I was the architect of my own life, demanding respect in exchange for my presence. The family might resist, plead, or threaten, but I was done. The silence that replaced their laughter and dismissiveness was louder than any argument. For the first time, they faced the reality that I was not theirs to take for granted. The fragile equilibrium was breaking, and I was ready to face whatever came next. Now, the Stewarts face a new reality, one that I'm still adjusting to myself. The family that once saw me as an endless resource, a quiet fixer, and a forgiving sister who'd absorb every slight, now knows there's a line they crossed. It's a line I've drawn firmly in the sand, and it marks a boundary they must respect if they want any part of me in their lives going forward. The choices are clear: earn my respect through accountability, or face permanent distance from someone who has spent years giving everything without receiving much in return. This new chapter is as much about protecting myself as it is about redefining what family means to me. I've come to understand that familial love isn't unconditional when it's built on exploitation and disregard. Loving someone doesn't mean surrendering your self-worth or tolerating disrespect. And I'm done pretending that forgiveness alone can fix what's painfully broken beneath the surface. David has been my rock throughout this whole ordeal. His steadiness, kindness, and unwavering support have been a lifeline. Unlike my family, he sees me clearly, not the invisible sister who quietly picks up the pieces, but the woman who deserves dignity and respect. He's stood beside me, encouraging me to hold firm on my boundaries, reminding me that it's okay to prioritize my needs, my happiness. His belief in me has been the counterbalance to the family's dismissal. And together, we've been building a life where I'm no longer defined by their expectations. My chosen family now includes David and a close circle of friends who have witnessed my journey. These are the people who celebrate my successes, listen without judgment, and offer unconditional support without conditions or hidden agendas. They show me daily what true respect and love feel like, and their presence has helped me rediscover my own voice and strength. It's a relief to be surrounded by people who honor my boundaries instead of challenging or ignoring them. The silence from Vanessa and my parents has been telling. Their once loud presence in my life, the constant demands, the careless jokes, the emotional manipulation, has faded into an uneasy quiet. Vanessa's laughter, which used to echo through family gatherings like a mocking soundtrack, is gone. Instead, there's a heavy stillness, a palpable tension that wasn't there before. It's as if the house they built on my goodwill has lost its foundation, and they're grappling with what that means. In social settings, I no longer feel like I'm shrinking to make space for Vanessa's spotlight or my parents' dismissiveness. I'm beginning to stand taller, more present, and more authentic. The absence of their toxic dynamics has created room for me to breathe, to grow, and to dream beyond the limitations they imposed. It's not always easy. The wounds run deep, and moments of doubt still creep in. But each day, I'm learning to trust myself more, to listen to my needs and honor them without guilt. This process has also revealed a powerful lesson. Respect isn't automatic, especially not within family. It must be earned and continually nurtured. Family ties don't grant carte blanche to abuse, neglect, or entitlement. Boundaries are not betrayals. They're necessary protections. I've come to see that demanding respect is an act of love for myself, a way to break free from a cycle that once kept me trapped in silence and sacrifice. There's a bittersweetness to this realization. While I mourn the loss of what I hoped family could be, I also feel a profound sense of freedom. Freedom to live life on my terms, to build relationships that uplift rather than diminish me, and to reclaim the joy and peace I deserve. The path ahead is uncertain, but it's mine to shape, not dictated by others' whims or past betrayals. As I reflect on everything, the canceled wedding, the betrayals, the heartbreak, and the quiet rebellion, I see now that this isn't just about one night or one family drama. It's about reclaiming my identity beyond the roles I was forced into: the silent supporter, the forgiving sister, the invisible woman. I'm stepping into a new version of myself, stronger, wiser, and unapologetically clear about what I will and won't accept. The silence that follows my decisions is a space filled with possibility. It's a pause before the next act, a moment for everyone involved to reconsider what respect and love truly mean. For me, it's a starting point, a chance to live authentically, surrounded by people who value me. I'm no longer waiting for the family I thought I had. I'm building the family I want. And as I move forward, I carry with me the lessons hard-earned on this journey. Respect isn't a given. It's a choice we make every day. Boundaries aren't walls, but bridges to healthier connections. And above all, self-worth is the foundation that no one can take away unless I allow it. This is where I stand now, firm, resolute, and quietly hopeful. The laughter that once masked pain has faded, replaced by a steady, calm strength. The Stewarts may have lost their safety net, but I've finally found mine, in myself, and the life I'm creating beyond their shadows.